Alrighty, we're back. Happy Christmas for people who celebrate Christmas. Happy Yule for all you pagans out there, and winter solstice and whatever else is going on in your lifestyle of choice. So, yesterday, I did a video, 11th in the series on massive societal change. And I talked about likely, even favorable changes in how men and women relate to each other, relate to the work they have to do, their purpose, relate to marriage, families, children, and a bunch of other things. Probably not real popular topics for a lot of people alive today in the end of 2025, but in a different set of circumstances, men and women are going to have to face the reality that their lives together and apart are different, and their expectations in regards to community are also different. So go back and watch that to get the context for what I'm going to talk about today, which is no children. Children as people did not play very much in that last video. Children, of course, are a necessity in village life, and the role of women in producing children is a contingent fact of basically biology. So we kind of know where that part's headed. And you can argue whether or not that's the best use of women's lives, or whether women are treated fairly, or whether that's oppressive or parochial, or a lot of different ways you could approach that. That's fine. You can do that. But I took the approach I did. And there is, however, another approach, which is that it proceeds in the future after collapse, post-collapse, much as it proceeds today, which is to say that women and couples choose not to have children. And there's a lot of ways where that might work out. I don't mean work out as like, oh, that's a great idea. Work out, I mean like how that could happen. And some of the reasons post-collapse that women and couples don't want to have children, and individuals might not even want to marry. The logic that applies today for some people may apply in a post-collapse world, that they simply, nothing will have changed for them. Their decisions that worked pre-collapse about why they're running their life the way they're running it might still apply post-collapse. But it's kind of complicated, and there will be different pressures and different forces working for and against people who want to live their life a certain way, in a family way. Let's just say that that's what they want. They want to be couples, and they want to have children. They want to have a family, and there may be reasons why they can't do that, in addition to reasons why they might not want to do that. So let's take a look at that. Quick aside, these videos don't always do real well with the algorithm. So if you want to see this kind of content get more views and have a bigger community, then if you have it, subscribe. That helps. But you can always leave a like. It's completely free. Go ahead and do that. And leave a comment. What do you think about the topic? And maybe even suggest other topics I might do. Again, the series is massive societal change. And I believe that global heating and all the stresses that come with that, and there are dozens of stresses that fall out from just global heating, why that will result in massive societal change. Because it will. Across everything. So let's look at children, shall we? Let's set context. So you can't get too far. Maybe the mainstream media doesn't cover this much, but you can't get too far on the internet without running into podcasts and YouTubes and Twitter accounts or whatever else that are talking about books, right? People are writing books on the topic. Why there are no children, or why people are choosing not to have children. There's also similar stories about why men and women are not dating, or why men and women are not getting married. And that's certain, lack of a partner relationship could certainly interfere with producing children. But there's all that might still apply in a post-collapse world. There's nothing to say that all of a sudden we all have an epiphany and are converted in our lifestyle choices, and suddenly we find ourselves wanting to run our lives differently. There's a high probability, in fact, that women who had reasons for not wanting to start their own families still have those reasons. They just do. They may not want children, period. They may not want the burden. They may not want the risk. And one of the things that we've heard stated, I don't know how prevalent this is, but it's out there, take it or leave it, is that women don't feel right today bringing children into this world, that this world is full of suffering. And the suffering, no one seems to care about children suffering. So why bring a child into the world if you can't protect them from suffering? And some people will say, what suffering? Or why can't you protect your children? What's stopping you from doing that? But let's just say that that's a legitimate concern. The women do feel that way. And will that change post-collapse? It seems unlikely to me. If that's your rationale for not having children when you're really still of childbearing years, then that would still apply. So there is definitely a possibility that a lot of the logic that's keeping women out of the breeding pool would apply yet again, and maybe even more so. So let's talk about some of the logic behind why people don't want or may not be able to have children. I just alluded to one. There is basically a moral decision not to do it. It's a bad idea. You're going to bear someone into the world to suffer. But another reason that women are not currently having children is that they can't find relationships that work for them. What do they say? I'm not in that community, but what are they saying? They're saying there's no good men. If a woman meets, which would a woman rather meet in the forest, a man or a bear? And then they say, I'd rather meet the bear. So that's a tongue-in-cheek way of saying there are no desirable men. Men are a problem. Men are unpredictable. A bear, at least, is predictable. I don't know what the logic is about the man-bear thing, but that's a meme that's going around. Who would you rather run into in the forest, a man or a bear? So there's obviously something going on that men and women are just not connecting. Because certainly when men hear women complaining about how when they're with a man they feel unsafe, or they feel like they're going to be molested or accosted, or the men have bad motives, then when men hear that from women who are probably not talking to men, they're just talking among themselves on YouTube or Substack or wherever, then that causes men to sort of back away from these relationships. And I've been seeing a lot of this. It's even making its way into mainstream media, which is probably when I first ran into it. It's often associated with what we call demographic collapse. Most of the developed world is now in demographic collapse, that women, it always comes down to women because women are the reproductives. So it's really up to them. Men can't reproduce without women, and women have to accept men. There are laws that prevent women from being forced into motherhood and so on. So it's really down to women and what they want. Now, if they find themselves in an environment where they don't feel comfortable starting families, and maybe that environment is just that marriage doesn't work, well, then they're not going to start families. But also, there are other incentives. So if a woman can't really find a man who will be supportive and let her raise her children, then she's going to want to have a career of her own, with her own money and her own retirement fund and her own car, maybe even her own house, right? So she takes care of herself. She has her career path and probably her education. Maybe there's a student loan that has to be paid off as a result. And a bunch of other incentives to not be in the dating pool, to not be thinking about men, and to not want to be with men, and just want to focus on her life and her choices, and stay on a comfortable path for her, and not be distracted, and not be pressured. Don't pressure me to have children, because that's pressuring me to accept a man in my life, and I'm not finding that man, so I can't be under that kind of pressure. There's a lot of that going on, and the incidence of this, where women are just not wanting to have relationships and families, is so severe in some developed countries that now the population is in what we call demographic decline. A healthy population has a certain number of children, a certain number of teenagers, a certain number of adults of reproductive age, a certain number of elders, and then at some point the stack starts to falter at the top, and finally, there's some 90-year-olds, but they're very few, and it's generally looks something like a pyramid. Not quite. Sometimes it's more of a stovetop with a pyramid on top. That being the idea of a stable demographic profile. I could bring one of those up, but I'm not going to bother doing it right now. So demographics is tricky. There's political aspects to demographics. There's economic components. There's a trust thing that goes on. If women are finding that it's just too reckless for her to be dependent on society to support her in the case where she has small children, then she just won't have small children. So if she can't trust the environment to help her to be successful as a mother, then she won't have children, because she also has to look out for herself. And looking after a bunch of young children might be not good enough. She can't take care of herself, and then she can't take care of her children, and it's all a disaster. So as a result, the developed nations where women have lots of options, including career, there's a demographic collapse. There aren't enough children in the pipeline, in the growth pipeline, to provide for a reproductive population a little, 2 decades down the road. So when you're in a demographic decline, it tends to be sort of a death spiral, where every generation is just not quite sufficient to create the next generation, and that generation is also, because it's also small, won't be enough to reproduce yet the generation after them, and you can have populations that just vanish. And there are lots of examples of peoples, including entire civilizations, that simply vanished from the earth. And how does that happen? Well, it must be a population decline of some kind, some mechanism to cause them to simply not be there anymore. And demographic collapse is one of those. And people also leave and they migrate. But when people are leaving an area because of whatever drought or crop failures or political failures, for whatever reason people might be leaving an area, they may not be having children at that point. They may maybe simply say, wow, this is just not getting better. And, my children haven't survived. There was too much violence. There was not enough food. And my children starved to death. And now I, as an adult, I'm going to leave. And so sometimes when you go into a region where there used to be a fairly active population and now there's nobody, a demographic decline might have been part of that, as well as, other environmental harms. So this is currently happening in the developed West. Women are making this decision not to have children. And once enough women have decided not to have children, then the population is probably, unless something really turns around, and what would that look like? Different economic system, different economic incentives. That when the incentives aren't working anymore, for women to say, yes, I feel really comfortable about having a family. I really want children in my life. And so we're going to do this, and I'm going to have enough children to basically replace myself and my mate, which is 2. And if women aren't having that discussion or feeling comfortable, then your population is doomed. And that is currently happening in the developed West and in Asia as well. You'll hear the horror stories about Japan, South Korea, China, Taiwan. They're not replacing their own aging population. They're just not producing young people. And there's some real horror stories out there. This could end very badly for people living in those regions. Those populations may simply collapse. And suddenly, you get enough, if you get too many old people, and they can't really run the show. And if there's no young people coming up to build and maintain the infrastructure, to become doctors, nurses, teachers, political leaders, then there's nothing. And the old people just fend for themselves, and no one looks after them, and then they die. They're not even buried because there's nobody around who notices they're dead. And you can have a complete collapse of your population. That can happen. And this is what they're worried about happening in, like I just mentioned. It's a little different in the U.S. because we're attractive to immigrants, whereas Asian countries tend to be a little bit xenophobic, so they don't want a lot of foreigners coming in. And if you go to those places, you don't really see immigrants having families. You may see guest workers, but you don't see immigrant people having families. So their demographic collapse is probably unstoppable unless something changes. Also, what's happening in the world currently is that the economic situation in the developed world is actually not very good. Even though these are the wealthiest nations on earth, the problem, put briefly, is wealth imbalance, that most of the wealth accumulates with the elites and the people who, middle class, right, who probably would be buying homes and having children and sending their kids to college and all that stuff. They're impoverished, and people working very hard, husband and wife both work if they're married, right? There's a lot of divorce in these situations, and there's also a lot of people that never marry, never find that right person who will help them, because that's what you're supposed to do when you're a couple. You're supposed to help each other get through hardships. But if the hardships are simply overwhelming, then you don't even have time to spend time finding that Mr. or Mrs. Right. You're just working, just to make ends meet. And when you're home, you're exhausted, and so you go to bed and you sleep. You eat a quick meal, probably some frozen food or instant ramen or something like that, and you go to bed and you get up the next day, and maybe you're working 2 jobs, and so you're only getting 6 hours of sleep anyway. And this is really bad. People just don't have the opportunity. Now, that's current events. We're obviously having a hard time. Does that change post-collapse? Some of it might, but watch what might happen. All that stuff gets worse. Now, it's true that once we're in a post-collapse world and there's no fossil fuels and there's no commuting and the freeways are empty, but it's also going to be true that the shops are empty, the stores are empty. There won't be an emergency room where you can go. There won't be a physician or even a pharmacy to give you life-preserving medications. There won't be first responders to come to your aid if you feel like you're being mistreated in any particular way. So for men and women who are currently not finding opportunities to engage in mate selection, meeting other people, engaging in mate selection, who are already so overworked and overstressed that they can't really connect the dots anymore, they're not, in a post-collapse world, they're still not going to be able to connect the dots. It might even be worse. Now, conceivably, as I mentioned in the last video, if we can avoid becoming so atomized and fragmented, but instead of that, which is what we are now, instead of that going forward, atomization, fragmentation, being alone, instead of that going forward, we instead deliberately come together and form new types of communities. They're new to us, but they wouldn't be new, say, to a town or village 400 years ago. That would have been completely common. how we might come together now and reversing a trend of being apart. We might come together now, but we won't all do that. And even if we do, is it enough? Is it enough? In a post-collapse world, everybody is basically growing food. And there may be, other things you can do to help prop up your community. There might be someone who's a healer, and there might be someone who's a teacher for any children that there are, and there might be other specialties in your community because people have skills from their earlier life. But even if that's true, simple survival, just having food, having water, protecting your perimeter, dealing with disease outbreaks, right? That's going to be really hard. So it's possible that a different set of forces post-collapse will actually reinforce what is currently a problem, which is that people don't have time, and they have trust issues, and they're fearful of the future. That's current events leading to demographic problems, and in particular, no children. But in post-collapse world, those same concerns might be doubly so or triply so. You might have such a dangerous environment that even if you do have a community, and even if you circle your wagons and you have your fences and you have your support network, it just might not be enough. So what is currently in today in real life is a decision on someone's part that they're not going to marry, they're not going to start a family and have children and then raise their children. That deliberate decision now may not be quite so deliberate post-collapse. It'll simply be reality. You can't do it. You're working too hard, and there's too many threats in the environment. There might even be outbreaks of childhood diseases or other types of disease epidemics that affect children more than adults. And something that affects children more than adults every single time isn't even disease. It's simply lack of calories. One of the things that a functioning village does is it makes sure that there's enough food to feed everybody. And women who are managing their household, they do a lot of things to make sure there's food. They engage in food preservation, smoking meats, raising animals, and butchering the animals and salting the meats or smoking the meats. They pickle vegetables. They store vegetables in environments that preserve them, like a root cellar or something like that. So once a village is established and best practices have been spread among the households, then there might be some idea that, hey, we can't always count on having a lot of food, but if we can lay up food like grain and silos and things like that, then that may tide us over. And so men and women, couples, may feel like, okay, our life is sufficiently stable now, and we feel pretty good about there's going to be food, there's going to be water, there's going to be shelter, there's going to be mutual support, security, and things like that. That maybe it's not a bad time to have a child. So this is going to be a very difficult set of decisions for people post-collapse. Do we feel secure doing this? Do I feel secure marrying or being with a person? Do I feel that I have enough resources? And the decision may be different for a man and a woman. The man might say, I feel like I can provide for a wife and family. So he'll find a woman who's willing to marry, they marry, and they start their family. And then he can come through because there's enough resources for him to do that. That's a decision on his part. And on the woman's part, it may be, okay, it seems like our village, our group, whatever, is stable enough that, I see other women successfully raising children, and I sense that, yes, if I wanted to have a family, I could probably get away with that. I'd probably do that and be successful. And then she may say, okay, now I'm ready for a husband. Now I'm ready to get married. But this idea of a post-collapse world verging slowly into more stability, that doesn't necessarily happen in a few years. That may not happen 10, 15, 20 years. This may be generational change. We may have to relearn so many skills. We may have to clean up the environment. We might have to restore land for agricultural purposes. It could be really difficult times. And you may go 10 years trying to build up a community. You may go 15 years trying to figure out how to do things. And then a lot of the women who were 25 when they entered a post-collapse civilization, they're 40 years old now. Yes. And for them, it's a little late. And maybe it's not that late. Maybe they can still have children. But also, women, and it always comes down to women because it does, okay? They are the ones who produce the children. And if that's unfair, so be it. I'm not talking about fairness here. I'm talking about biology. So the women not only have to be in a certain age bracket, they also need to be healthy. Women who are subject to starvation, if you like, aren't going to be able to ovulate. They're not going to be able to carry a pregnancy. They're not going to, raise the child, take care of the child, breastfeed the child after the fact. So it's going to be hard for women past a certain timeline of post-collapse to want to be able to do it, even if they want to. So these are the challenges of a post-collapse world. It may be that women still feel like the world is too dangerous. They may feel like they're not healthy enough. They may feel like their environment is hostile. They may feel like it's immoral as a principle. It's immoral to bring children into a world like they find themselves in. So in the end, because of various conspiracies, okay, we may have a world with no children. Just, there aren't any. And that's demographic collapse, which is currently happening in many parts of the developed world. That's a thing now. And there are already scenes like what you're seeing here. Playground equipment that's rusted, playground equipment that hasn't had a child on it for a decade. And you don't have to go very far to find these things. It's up to women whether we have children or not. It really is. So society must create conditions where women are comfortable doing that, incentivized to do that, feel it's the right thing to do, morally, ethically, feel they can be successful at that, because what woman wants the heartbreak of bearing children and then losing them? Too much of that, and of course she'll give up, right? Well, what else would you expect? So we have to have stable communities that incentivize women, support women, encourage women, give women examples, remind them, and then we need the whole group of girls who are raised up to understand that this is something they can do, or maybe not that they can do, that they must do. But are we going to do that? We're very egalitarian these days. Here in the West, here in the developed world, we're very egalitarian, loosey-goosey, and you can do whatever you want. You can have your career path. You can be a YouTube influencer. You can be, a podcaster. You can sell real estate, whatever you want to do. And, having children, getting married, being in a relationship at all, least of all having children, is completely secondary, can be completely secondary. That's kind of the message that young women are getting these days. And they're going off to college and they're getting their degrees and they're coming out with expectations for their lives. And their expectation is not, well, I just got my master's degree in business administration. I guess I'll just have a child now. I guess I'll just get married tomorrow and have a child the day after that. That's not their mindset. And so post-collapse, a lot of women, again, it comes down to the women, are going to be tossed for a loop. And they go into collapse thinking, I have to take care of myself, and there aren't any good men, or at least there aren't any men that suit me. And now the situation is worse. It's post-collapse. So they may completely give up on any dreams of ever having the right environment to have a child. And they may simply not do it. May not do it. And it may take communities decades to get themselves coherent and on glide path and stable enough for a group of women to say, yeah, okay, this works for me now. I will marry. I will have a child. I will start a family. It may take decades. It may take 20 years. It may be generational change that we have ahead of us, because the collapse that's coming is going to leave us high and dry. High and dry, people. This is going to be a big rug pull, okay? We're going to have the rug pulled right out from under us, and nobody is in a very good position. I mean, nobody is in a good position even to survive this. I say this regularly on this channel. I fully expect, because we are so dependent on things the way they are, including constant available to cheap fossil fuels, in particular crude oil. We are so dependent on all this business as usual going forward, that when it does not go forward, I believe that 999 people out of 1,000 will simply die. And that's a lot of people. And that's going to lead to trauma, PTSD, and all the other forms of trauma. Depression, when you're maybe you're 16, 17 years old and you're just looking to start your life, and then the global economy collapses, you might never recover. Boys or girls may just never recover and go into the rest of their lives bitter, frightened, distrustful, and just never connect with anybody. And, the small children who have to endure collapse, it's going to be really hard. It's going to be very difficult for women with young children to survive. Now, if they find themselves in a good community, and that good community has decent structures and really, takes care of the women with children, then maybe that mother with her children might survive. And so that helps offset some of the demographic collapse. But we shouldn't assume that. That's a big assumption. That means in the first 100 days, see my book, It Was 100 Days, link in the description. That means that in 100 days, people very deliberately pull themselves together, and they create an environment where mothers with their children are safe. Now, my book is a work of fiction. I kind of just assume that people will have that mindset and that they'll understand the importance of that, and they'll do that. And then after they've done that, they'll invite the women and children in, and they'll take care of them, and they'll make sure that they find husbands to help facilitate that. That's a big assumption on my part. It doesn't have to be that way. It could be that in a post-collapse world, there is so little access to food, clothing, shelter, protection, that the most vulnerable members of society perish. That they are in the 999 out of 1,000 that don't make it. And do we have any reason to believe that won't be all the mothers and all the children? If we're going to suffer massive mortality events, is there any reason to believe that the weakest and most vulnerable members of our community aren't going to die first? Do we have any right to assume that? And that's layered on top of the observation that women currently don't feel that comfortable bringing children into this world, IRL, December 25th, 2025, okay? That very world, that exact world, December 25th, 2025, may not look good. And we're still business as usual. We haven't had a collapse. Well, I mean, maybe we're getting close, and maybe that's why people are so rattled and uncertain and are not committing. Yeah, these are maybe the early days of collapse. Maybe we'll look back in 3 years and say, yeah, about December 25th, about Christmas Day, maybe 2025, yeah, the wheels were coming off. And yeah, so mothers and children, are they going to survive? What if they don't? What if no one bothers? What if women with children are simply seen as a burden, which is what most men think these days? Men don't date single moms with children. They just don't do it. So who's going to take care of the single mothers with their children? 2 or 3 or, small children, maybe, all under 10 or 12 years of age. Who's going to look out for her, who's going to help her with her children, who's going to protect her, who's going to feed her, make sure she gets food, who's going to make sure her children are well fed and protected, sheltered. Will anybody do that? That's a question. That is a legitimate question. Now, of course, I'm assuming that she doesn't have a husband, but there are plenty of scenarios where men are actually among the first to perish. Because what are they doing? They're trying to provide for their families. They're trying to protect their families. They're fighting to survive. And the women and children aren't fighting. They're not combatants. They're hiding. And when the father, the husband, the whatever goes out and tries to procure food and tries to do battle with the looters and tries to get what the family needs, tries to get the family out of town or tries to get the family into shelter, he's out there, right? He's out there. He's dealing with the disaster. And what if a lot of those men just die? They're not prepared for this. They don't know what they're doing. It's day 1, day 2, day 3. They're thinking they have to, go to the liquor store and buy some milk and bread for the kids, and so they're just going to do that. And meanwhile, there's people at the same liquor store, stealing the money out of the till and breaking everything and killing each other for the bottled water. And he walks into that and he doesn't walk out. And then she's wondering where her husband is. And she waits and people come along and say, "Are you okay?" And she says, "I'm waiting for my husband. He'll be right back. I'm sure he's just being, and he doesn't show up." And will anyone take her in? Will anyone take care of her and her children? I don't know the answer to that. We're not very moral. We are morally and ethically degenerate. At least here in the United States. Here in the United States, it's all about cruelty. We don't take care of anybody. Sink or swim. Well, okay, there's going to be a lot of sinking. Because women with children and no husband and no community, they don't survive. They die. And if in the end, post-collapse, there's too much trauma, too much fatality, too much disease, too much struggle every single day to get food and shelter and water and clothing. And if no communities form, because that may not happen. I mean, I wrote about it in my book. It did happen. But I wrote the book encouraging people to think about that happening. It's a user's manual. Yeah, you may want to think about this. You got about 100 days to figure this shit out. I recommend you figure it out. And in the book, there is room for women and children. And the women recognize their opportunity, maybe even their responsibility, to have babies. And they want to have babies. And it gives them a sense of purpose, a sense of hope, and all the other things that you might imagine. But it's also true that in my book, they are already inside of a community. Because that community forms in the first 50 days of 100. And after that, they feel confident forming families. But that's a deliberate choice on somebody's part. That's a deliberate choice. And are we going to make those choices? I hope so. How confident am I? Not really. And if we can't figure out how to provide supportive communities for women to marry or at least find a mate, and then to become mothers and to become successful mothers multiple times, like at least 3 children per woman, if not 4. Then if those conditions don't materialize, there may be no children. And there you go. There you go. Not my idea. But we are right now, IRL, December 25th, 2025. We are right now kind of in that situation. A lot of the developed countries are not in replacement mode. They are having too few children demographically. They are already in demographic collapse. Well, then take these conditions that we're in right now and extrapolate those into a post-collapse world. And what do you expect? Do you have any basis for expectation that women will just marry and have, or at least have husband men who will take care of them, and thereby, bear children and have families. And would you have any basis for that expectation? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Now, if I had written my book where there were no successful families, then it's arguable whether the book should exist at all, because I wrote it from the perspective of survivors. And since I wrote it from the perspective of survivors, I just had to assume that they figured out how to have children. Because it's not good enough if you survive. The future isn't going to record your success if there are no children to become adults, to talk about your success and how they came to be, and how their community came to be, and how difficult it was, or how easy it was, or whatever it was. If those people don't happen, then there is no future. How could there be? And if there's a book that nobody ever reads, did it happen? So when I wrote my book, and I'm very wedded to this idea that this world, our world, the world we are living, is a story. It's a story we tell to ourselves and to each other. It's a story that every one of us is a character in, that we are, probably most of us think of ourselves as the hero of that story. But stories don't continue past the last living participant in the story. Now, you can write things down and you can record them in a journal, but if no one comes after you to pick up that book or pick up that journal and thumb through it, then that story is extinct. That story ended. No one will ever know what happened. Now, this sounds like a trope or something like that. This is like, well, I'm working really hard on this, but I believe this to be true. This is like a tenet for me. And I wrote this book in the hope that it invokes the future. I want the story to become the story. That's my magic. That's the magic I'm doing. That's the witchcraft I'm doing. I wrote a story. I wrote it about survival. And I want that story to come true. A different world where survival isn't possible, and meaning literally, women do not find mates. Women do not bear children. Women do not have families. In that world, there is no story. There is only extinction. Demographic collapse, disbursement, entropy, and a loss of everything. No one to bring the story forward. So the story never existed. Now here we are talking about this. I'm talking about this. You're listening. You're becoming confused. You're like, where's this going? We do have a responsibility to imagine a world after this one, post-collapse. Not where every individual has an AR-15 and every individual is on their own and they're all battling it out in the streets, trying to find the last gallon of gas and trying to find the last bottle of water. We have a responsibility, I think, to imagine a different future. And the future we have to imagine cannot be constructed the way the current present is in real life, IRL. We must imagine a post-collapse world with children. We have to deliberately do that. Now, if that means that women are going to have to set aside their career goals, trust me, post-collapse, you're not going to have a career. If that means that men must set aside their distrust of women and Me Too movements and feminism, trust me, there's not going to be any of these movements. There's not going to be any isms. There's not going to be any social media. There's not going to be trolling or hagmaxing or anything else, okay? You're just going to have to give up on your dating app. You're just going to have to come together somehow, learn to trust each other. I know it's going to be hard. There's all this water under the bridge where we're not very trustful right now. You're going to have to give all that up, and you're going to have to learn how to trust each other. And the women in particular are going to have to feel confident that this is the right thing for them to be doing in terms of their own survival. That yes, I am going to survive. I feel okay bringing children into this world in which I find myself, and then when all those stars line up for her, then she feels comfortable being in long-term relationships, being in being willing to have children and being willing to raise a family. But we have to imagine that world happening. It's not going to happen on its own, especially not given current situation where men and women are not connecting. Men and women are not trusting each other. Men and women have dropped the ball. They have forgotten their roles. They don't even recognize roles or requirements or opportunities or anything else. It's just what's in it for them. These are my pleasures, and this is what I'm doing for myself. And post collapse, that's going to have to stop. Because if it doesn't, then there's not going to be any children. Can we get around all that? Can we change all that? I don't know. It's a legit question. And like everything else, it's not a bad time to discuss it. This is not a bad time to discuss the problem. How men and women are going to come together and raise families together. It seems bizarre. It seems ridiculous. Everybody's doing their own thing, and everyone's happy with their thing, except they're not as happy as they could be, or maybe should be. But this is the only deal being offered, and every dog for himself, and it's a battle to survive, and you can't trust anybody, and that's not going to work. What can I say? Because if we take that forward, there's not going to be any children. And from the point of, there's no children, you're essentially what I call functionally extinct. Past a certain point in a person's life, or given too many stresses in the environment, you can't reproduce. Everybody gets old. They can't take care of themselves. They can't do the work of rebuilding civilization. They can't plant the crops. They can't harvest them. They can't, cook the meals. They can't, they're too arthritic. They can't even get out of bed. Whatever their problem is. At some point, you're too old and you can't pull it off. And then you're functionally extinct. Now, I don't think humanity will ever go extinct. We've come close to, not existing several times in the past as Homo sapiens, our species. And it didn't happen. We're more resilient than that. We're tougher than that. But this next collapse is going to be a doozy. It's going to be a doozy. And when I say that 999 people out of 1,000 are not going to cross the finish line, that's a big deal. Now, there's 8,000 million humans. And losing 999 out of 1,000 still leaves you with 8 million humans. And that's a lot of humans. But if they're too spread out and the males and females can't find each other, or there's not enough humans left in any given area to form resilient and supporting communities, then you might go from 8 million to 800,000 to 80,000 to 8,000 to 8, and then you're done. Because they just couldn't figure it out. And that's how all animals go extinct. You had plenty, and then you had a few, and then they weren't close enough to mate, and maybe there weren't even any healthy females left in the population, and then they went extinct. In my book, it was 100 Days, link in the description. I have a whole chapter on, I can't remember the title, near-term human extinction or something like that, in which I argue both that it's unlikely and actually is possible, because it really just depends on how we behave. And the prospect of no children is out there, folks. That's real. That's a thing. And if we're not careful, and if we're not deliberate, we could easily find ourselves in a situation where you look around and not only are there no adults of reproductive age, there's no children who are going to be adults of reproductive age. There's nothing. There's no hope. The situation is hopeless. And you're it. And your hope, of course, maybe even your expectation is that somewhere people are figuring it out. But what if that's not true? What if it doesn't happen? We could go extinct, just one group at a time. Too many childhood diseases, too many women with malnourished, too many children end up malnourished and dying of malnutrition, too many wars, too many diseases of different kinds, too many droughts, too many crop failures. And pretty soon you're looking around and you've got a lot of adults, but none of them are bearing children. None of them are raising families. There are no families, there are no children. You're just a bunch of adults, and maybe one or two of the women could still have children, but they're not thinking about that because they know what's going to happen. They're just going to die. Because the environment was never created to support women becoming mothers and mothers being supported to raise their children. We never figured that out. We barely know how to do it now. And we have a global economic system, and men and women have jobs. They have money. They have money to throw away. They have all the time in the world to spend their money, but they're not having children, so that's a thing. How do I feel about this? Well, meh, la-di-da. Too stupid to survive, I guess. Because a lot of what's causing men and women not to find each other or not to recognize each other as valuable is just propaganda. It's all the isms. It's the capitalisms, and it's the economic systems, and the economic injustice, and too much religion, too much hyperbole, too much conspiracy thinking, and mistrust, and all this kind of shit, and QAnon, and all this kind of bullshit, and people just can't get it together. They can't even come together at Christmas time and share a meal without people blowing up and yelling and screaming at each other. So there you go. There's your environment. Now, how do you think that's going to play out post-collapse? Because that's what's coming. Oh, yeah, that's a coming. You can kind of feel it in the air. A lot of things. We'll be lucky if we avoid nuclear war in the next 2 or 3 years. I mean, that would be really lucky. I'm giving that coin toss odds right now. I'm giving nuclear war on some scale. It doesn't have to be huge, but some scale. Coin toss odds in the next 2 to 3 years. And then what happens? We're just most of us are just 3 meals away from completely losing our minds. Most of us, if we lost our jobs today, we would be completely incapable of managing. And if you're a husband and wife, or you're a couple, and you've got 2, 3 small children, and all of a sudden neither the husband nor the wife has a job, you're looking at a disaster. And here in America, we tell people like that to sink or swim. There's no support at all for families. There's no support at all for families with children. There's no support for children. It's sink or swim. And if you're a billionaire or a millionaire multiple times over, well, then you're probably going to be fine. But those people aren't having children unless you're Elon Musk. He actually believes in survival of the white race. And so, he's already had 14 children, I think. So he's on board with making sure that he's with enough women and they have enough children that he is represented in the future population. But I think he's the only person doing that. Just one guy. You would need a massive movement. You would need millions of men with that attitude to make sure that humanity doesn't accidentally go extinct. You need millions of men, and of course millions of women, or maybe even tens of millions of women with that attitude to make sure humanity doesn't go extinct. That there are children. Because that's how you don't go extinct. There are children. And right now, there are not children. And post-collapse, there won't be children. Because whatever it is working today to give us no children, that'll be working tomorrow too. And it'll be working double time, triple time, 10 times post-collapse. We have to deliberately choose to be different. We have to deliberately say, we don't want to sleepwalk into this. We have to deliberately choose to create environments where women can find husbands, husbands understand their responsibilities, and the women accept their responsibility to bear children and raise families. We have to deliberately decide all that. Right now, we're not. And post-collapse, will we? That's asking a lot, isn't it? Isn't that asking a lot? Now, in my book, they figure it out. The women just say, yeah, I'm all about this community, and I love my boyfriend, I love my husband, I love my mate, and I want to have children with him, and the children give me purpose, and the children give me hope for the future, and so I'm going to have children. And that's, in my book, that's the decision that women make. It doesn't have to be that way. My book is a work of fiction. It doesn't have to be that way. It could. Will it? I don't know. I'm planning the follow-up to It Was 100 Days, and I haven't titled it yet. It's titled in the first book. I think the title is something like 10,000 Days of Silence, because to some extent, one of the characters in the first book writes the second book, or at least narrates it, and she is mute. She doesn't speak. So for her, the book is different. The story is different. And so that will probably be where I explore some of these topics of, do we figure it out or not? And I haven't decided how I'm going to end that book. I could be honest. And I could say people don't figure it out. They don't feel inclined to. They don't feel it's necessary. They feel that, like they feel today, the most important thing is my survival, my needs, my pleasures, my relationship with people, and how comfortable I am and uncomfortable I am, and can I be with people or not? Can I be with men? Do I trust men? That kind of thinking may simply spill over into a post-collapse world, and we never figure it out. So what kind of book is that? I will probably have to be optimistic, and there's going to be some group of people that figures it out, some group of people where the women are cherished and the children are critical and important and loved by the entire community, and some group of people who finds a way forward that doesn't involve complete demographic collapse and resulting extinction or functional extinction or some combination of the two. Yeah, what's the point of writing the book if we don't figure it out, right? So I will probably do that. But I don't know. If I'm going to be realistic, what are we going to do? We're not doing it now. Will we do it after a collapse? I don't know. What do you think? Do you think we'll figure it out? What's your situation? Are you married? Do you have children? Are you taking care of kids? Do you plan on having kids? Do you think it's a bad idea? I'd be I'd be grateful to hear from people. Where are you at? What have you done, and what do you plan to do or not do, and why? I'd appreciate some essays in the comments. Well, I'm putting this out on Christmas Day, and there will be many views, and that's fine. Mostly I do these videos to clarify my own thinking and my own planning around, well, what can I do, right? Once again, subscribe to the channel if you'd like more of this kind of content, and leave a like. And of course, if you feel like you can contribute to this question, what are we doing and what should we be doing differently, then leave a comment. I read the comments and I appreciate them. And whatever else happens, it's very important that you don't die. Yeah.